The moon rose like a blade polished and sorrow-bright, merciless, and waiting to wound. Its light dripped across the forest, silvering every branch and every breath, whispering that this night would decide more than vows. It would carve destinies. Ayla had waited for this night since childhood. For years she had traced Kale's name into frost and sand, whispering prayers to the goddess of the moon that when the marking night arrived, their bond would be eternal. Every story she had ever believed told her that fate never failed its chosen pair. The moon did not lie. The alpha did not betray. Love did not break, but fate had a habit of smiling before it bit. All day the pack had prepared for the ceremony. The elders spread crushed petals across the clearing. The young ones sang blessings that trembled on the wind. The air itself smelled of promise rose, smoke, and something fierce beneath it, something animal that made hearts quicken. Kale, the alpha of the Silver Ridge pack, would mark his destined omega under the full moon. The story said that when the alpha's teeth met the omega's skin, the world would pause to listen, and even the stars would lower their gaze in respect. Ayla believed every word of it. She stood before her mirror as the moon climbed the sky. The white silk wrapped around her shoulders glimmered faintly. Her dark hair fell loose the way Kale liked it. Her hands trembled, not from fear but from wonder. She could already feel the weight of his gaze, the warmth of his voice. After tonight, she would belong. After tonight, she would be Luna. Outside, the drums began their slow, deliberate rhythm. Every beat said destiny. Every echo said forever. She stepped into the night, bare feet brushing the damp earth, her heart keeping time with the drums. Wolves howled in the distance, a chorus of welcome and warning. The path to the sacred clearing glowed faintly in the moonlight. Her pulse fluttered. Each step carried years of dreams. The air thickened as she approached the edge of the trees. A scent drifted toward her, familiar, intoxicating, pine, smoke, and the wild musk of the alpha she loved. Kale, her chest ached with relief. He was waiting. Everything was perfect, but beneath his scent was another softer, sweeter, edged with laughter she had heard since birth. A scent she knew as well as her own. Lyra, her sister. Ayla hesitated, her breath caught halfway. Maybe Lyra had come to help with the ritual. Maybe she was only bringing the ceremonial wine. Her heart tried to make excuses faster than her instincts could tear them apart. She took another step and another. The voices ahead grew clearer. The drums faded behind her. The forest swallowed sound until only the whispers remained. She heard a gasp, soft, broken, followed by a low growl that vibrated through the trees. Then another sound, wetter, slower. Too intimate for the night. That was supposed to belong to sacred vows. Her blood turned too. Ice thought she pushed aside the last branch, and the clearing opened before her like an exposed wound. Kale stood, half-shadowed in moonlight, his bare skin gleaming with sweat, his breath rough. His hands gripped Lyra's waist. His lips were pressed to her neck, right where the mark should have been hers. Lyra's fingers tangled in his hair, her head tilted back, eyes half-closed in pleasure and defiance. The world stopped. The drums ceased. The wind died. Even the moon looked away. Ayla didn't scream. The sound inside her throat was too wide for shape. She only watched, frozen between one heartbeat and the next, as Kale whispered words meant for her into her sister's ear. The bond that was promised to her shattered before it was ever made. The ache was quiet at first, then violent. It tore through her ribs, spread to her spine, burned up her throat. The night blurred. Her knees nearly buckled. That pride-cold, ancient, stubborn kept her upright. She turned away, her face blank, her pulse frantic. The silk around her body suddenly too thin to hide her humiliation. No one saw her leave. No one followed. She walked until her feet bled, until the forest thickened and the sound of the pack vanished behind her. When dawn bled into the horizon, she crossed the river that marked the pack's border. Behind her, wolves howled mourning or mocking. She couldn't tell by the time the sun rose. Ayla of the Silver Ridge pack was gone. Days turned to weeks. The pack searched, sent scouts, whispered of rogues and kidnappings. Kale said nothing. His silence spread like rot. Lyra wore the mark he never meant to give, flaunting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The pack accepted it because they had no choice. Destiny had to belong to someone. But the bond they saw was fragile, hollow, cursed. Kale ruled with the same strength. The same authority, but those who looked closely saw the fracture behind his gaze. The Alpha who once commanded storms now carried one inside his chest. Every night when the wind passed through the trees, it carried the faintest echo of her scent. Rose and rain, and something inside him broke again. Ayla wandered far from the lands that had betrayed her. The first days were filled with silence. The next with rage. She starved, she fought, she survived. She learned that the world beyond the pack had no mercy for Omegas. They were prey unless they bared teeth sharper than their hunters. Somewhere between hunger and heartbreak, she met those who lived without names, mercenaries. Wanderers, cursed wolves exiled from their packs. They taught her how to kill, how to hide, how to burn softness out of her soul. They called her the shadow that moves like smoke. She did not tell them her real name. Ayla had died the night Kale chose Lyra, years past. Her body hardened. Her heart did not heal, it calcified. But inside the armor a single ember survived, memory. The memory of his betrayal, the sound of her sister's laughter, the smell of crushed petals under a full moon. She fed that ember until it became purpose. She learned languages of war and silence. She earned scars that replaced jewelry. She became a story whispered in taverns, the woman who moved faster than arrows, who never missed a mark. They called her Luna's shadow, not knowing the truth behind the name that she once was meant to be Luna. Before the moon turned its face away, one night, beneath a blood-red moon, news reached her: the Alpha of Silver Ridge was dying. His pack was at war with its neighbors. His brother, Rylan, had taken command of their defense. Rylan, the quiet one, the scholar, the wolf who had never wanted power, was now leading armies in Kale's name. Something inside her stirred. Not pity, not forgiveness. The same force that had made her bleed once whispered again, "Go back." She told herself it was only to finish the story, to make the Alpha face the ghost he created. But when she looked into the mirror that night, she saw not vengeance but curiosity staring back the need to see if he remembered. The road home was lined with ghosts. Every tree, every scent, every shadow reminded her of what she had lost. Yet she walked with steady steps, armor hidden under silk, blades laced beneath her cloak. The pack's borders glowed faintly in the distance, guarded by torches and wolves who no longer knew her face. She moved through them like smoke, unseen, unstoppable. By dawn, she stood on the hill overlooking the valley of her past. The pack's fortress lay below, rebuilt, expanded, powerful. And there, at its heart, rose the banners of the new Alpha Rylan Calborn. Brother to the man who broke her, successor to the throne he no longer deserved. The sight made her smile for the first time in years. Fate seemed had a sense of irony. Inside the keep, the council prepared for the new Alpha's coronation. The elder wolves whispered that Rylan's rule might heal what Kale had ruined. The people wanted peace, not blood. They didn't know that peace was walking toward them, dressed in white and vengeance. As the moon rose that night, the gates opened for the visiting delegations. Among them, veiled and quiet, came a woman with silver eyes and a scent of rain. No one recognized her, but every wolf who crossed her path lowered their gaze without knowing why. The drums began again, those same drums that had once sung of destiny. Their rhythm crawled beneath her skin, awakening memories she thought she had buried. Each beat was a wound reopening. She entered the great hall. The pack turned, and there, at the throne's base, stood Kale, alive, scarred, silent. His eyes met hers across the room. For one heartbeat, neither moved. His expression flickered, confusion to disbelief, disbelief to fear. Behind him, Rylan stepped forward to greet the guests. His voice carried calm authority. The hall bowed. Kale did not. His gaze stayed on her, searching, pleading. Remembering. The drums fell silent. Ayla smiled, small, deliberate, merciless. The past had finally seen her face again. Outside, the wolves howled at the blood moon, and the forest whispered that the balance was shifting. Somewhere deep in the woods, the goddess turned in her sleep. Sensing that two threads of fate had tangled once more, Ayla returned not as the Omega who once begged for love, but as the reckoning born from it. The night that destroyed her had also forged her, and the Alpha who betrayed her was about to learn that betrayal is a lesson the moon never lets its children forget. Dawn rose slowly over Silver Ridge, spilling pale light across the valley like the quiet after a scream. Frost clung to the battlements. Banners hung heavy with dew. The pack was waking to a day it believed would bring peace. Not knowing that vengeance had already crossed its gates during the night, Ayla stood in her borrowed chamber. The silk veil that hid her face fluttering against her breath. Beneath it, her expression was calm, too calm, the stillness of a storm before it decides which direction to kill in. The mirror before her showed a stranger, smooth hair pinned high, armor disguised as satin, eyes that no longer trembled when they looked at pain. The girl who had once lived here had died under the full moon. The woman in her place was something else entirely, sharpened, deliberate, dangerous. She drew the veil down. The scar along her collarbone caught the light, faint and pale as frostbite. The mark Cale never gave her, life had carved instead. Outside, bells chimed across the courtyard. The pack gathered for Ryland's coronation, a day meant to cleanse the blood and rumors left behind by Cale's fall. It had been 3 years since the Alpha's betrayal became legend. 3 years since Ayla disappeared. They had sung songs to forget her. They had built statues to remember him. The irony made her smile. The living always honored ghosts, never the wounded. She turned from the window and adjusted the clasp of her cloak. Beneath the heavy fabric, steel whispered against her ribs, twin daggers resting where a heart used to be. Her heart, however, was not entirely her own anymore. It had learned to beat with caution, to guard each throb like a secret. But deep down, under the discipline and hate, a small, reckless pulse still remembered the way Cale used to say her name. It disgusted her. It kept her alive. The hall below thundered with celebration. Wolves in ceremonial armor lined the marble aisles, their heads bowed as Ryland ascended the dais. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had never desired power but earned it anyway. His silver hair caught the morning light. His voice, when he swore his oath, was steady, not the command of a conqueror but the promise of a healer. The pack adored him already. Ayla watched from the shadows of a balcony, unseen but seeing everything. She studied the man they now called Alpha, the gentle strength in his stance, the way he glanced at the guards instead of the crown, as if measuring their safety instead of his pride. He was the opposite of Cale in every way, and that difference fascinated her more than she expected. Then the doors at the end of the hall opened, and the air changed. Cale entered. No crown. No escort, only a scar running down his jaw and a silence that bent the room. His presence still carried the same weight, the same gravity that once held our entire world together. But his eyes, God's, his eyes, were hollow rivers now. They had drowned something they could never bury. The crowd shifted, uneasy. Even wolves knew when ghosts walked among them. Cale bowed his head briefly to Ryland and took his place among the elders. The brothers did not touch. Between them hung a history too sharp to breathe near. Ayla's pulse slowed. She could smell him even from across the hall. Pine and rain, the scent that used to mean safety and now meant war. The years had changed him, but not enough. Some memories don't obey time. The coronation ended with howls of loyalty. Bells rang, wine spilled, laughter rose. And as the celebration began, Cale's gaze lifted to the balcony. He froze. The veil hid most of her face, but not her eyes. His body went rigid. His wolf stirred, recognizing what his mind refused to believe. For a heartbeat, the hall ceased to exist. There were only 2 souls staring across the void of their ruin. Then she turned and vanished down the corridor, leaving the scent of rose and storm behind her, the scent he had buried and never escaped. She found the silence of the courtyard a better companion than the echoes of drums. Snow fell in thin threads, settling over the fountains like dust over forgotten prayers. She walked slowly, tracing her fingers along the cold stone railing. Her footsteps echoed the rhythm of her thoughts. Controlled, calculated, cruel. She did not plan to confront him yet. Not until she understood what kind of man he had become. The Cale she loved would have chased her into the ends of the forest. The Cale she hated would have burned it all down to hide his guilt. The man in the hall had done neither, and that unsettled her more than rage ever could. Behind her, footsteps broke the quiet. A voice, calm, low, careful. Ryland. He didn't know who she was. Not yet. But he felt her presence, the same way animals feel weather before it strikes. He thanked her for her service to the allied packs, welcomed her as an honored guest. His courtesy was effortless, his eyes curious, unthreatened. She responded with measured words and the kind of smile that hides knives. Ryland's gaze lingered, puzzled. There was something familiar in her stillness, something he couldn't name. But he didn't press. Instead, he offered a place at his council table, saying the new Alpha valued those who had fought for peace. She accepted with a nod that promised nothing and hid everything. When he left, she exhaled the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. The wind carried a distant howl from the northern hills, Kale's patrol returning to the fortress. Her hands clenched. Fate had arranged the board and every piece was in motion. That night, the pack feasted under the stars. Fires burned bright, wolves danced, wine spilled over laughter. Ayla moved among them like a ghost in flesh, her veil drawn, her smile polite. None recognized her. Time and pain had rewritten her face, carved her body into someone untraceable. But Kale saw her again. He watched from the edge of the crowd, jaw tight, breath shallow. His wolf strained beneath his skin, restless, uneasy, remembering her scent, her rhythm, her silence. He could feel the mark that never was like a scar reopening. Each time her eyes flickered his way, he felt the past drag its claws through his chest. Rylan joined her, offering a cup of wine. She accepted it. Their fingers brushed. The touch sent a strange, unwanted warmth through her. He smiled, gentle and unknowing. She looked away quickly, pretending indifference, but her pulse betrayed her. Across the fire, Kale's eyes darkened. The muscles in his throat worked as he swallowed something heavier than jealousy, recognition of the punishment fate had written for him. The woman he destroyed was now standing beside his brother, alive, radiant, unreachable. The wolves began to howl again, celebrating the new dawn. Rylan turned to her, inviting her to join the ritual howl, but her voice caught. The sound of wolves singing had once meant belonging. Now it was a dirge. She excused herself, slipping away toward the forest beyond the walls. The night outside was colder, quieter. Snow fell heavier now, wrapping the trees in white silence. She walked until the music of the feast faded, until only her heartbeat filled the air. The forest felt the same and entirely different, older, heavier, stained by memory. Here, years ago, she'd seen her world die. Here, the moon had watched and said nothing. She sank to her knees beside the frozen stream, touched the water's surface, and whispered to the reflection that trembled there. The face that looked back was not a stranger's anymore. It was hers, sharpened and sure, carrying both the wound and the weapon. Behind her, branches cracked under heavy boots. She didn't turn. Kale's voice came low, raw, close enough that the air quivered. She didn't need to see him to know the expression on his face. Guilt has its own scent. For a moment, neither moved. The wind pressed snow between them. Then she stood, slowly, turning to face the ghost that refused to stay dead. Time had changed him. Yes, the scars, the hollow eyes, the weight of a crown lost, but not enough to erase what he had done. His gaze swept over her veil, her posture, her silence, and the truth began to dawn in him like sunrise through fog. Ayla met his eyes, unflinching. The storm in her chest went still. The years of exile, the pain, the training, the waiting, all of it condensed into this heartbeat. He whispered her name, though his lips barely moved. The forest held its breath, and then she walked past him, her cloak brushing against his arm, the scent of rose and steel cutting through his confusion. She did not look back. Not yet. Behind her, Kale drew his knees in the snow, his hands pressed to the ground like a man trying to stop the earth from spinning. The wolf inside him howled, a sound torn between relief and ruin. The moon watched, silent again, knowing the story had only just begun. That night, Kale dreamed of her the way the sea dreams of drowning. He saw the forest burning, her silhouette standing against the flames, her eyes silver with fury. When he woke, his palms were bleeding from the claws he had forced back. He understood then, fate had brought her home not for forgiveness, but for reckoning, and Ayla, in her chamber, stood before the mirror once more, untying her veil. The mark along her collarbone glowed faintly, as if remembering the touch that never came. She pressed her palm against it and whispered to the darkness, "You will see me now." Outside, the wolves howled again, not in celebration this time, but in warning. A shadow had returned to Silver Ridge, and the past was stirring in its grave. Morning found the keep bone-white and brittle, as if the night had sucked the color from stone and sky and left only the outline of things. Frost wept the ramparts. Breath hung like thread before unraveling. The pack woke to the comfort of havoc guard changes, kitchen fires, the scrape of brooms, believing that routine could hold a world steady. It never had. It did not now. Kale had not slept. He moved the way a wound moves when it must pretend to be a body, deliberate, contained, refusing to leak. In the Eastern training yard, he sent soldiers through drills until their lungs turned the air to steam. When they faltered, he drove them again. Command was the only language left that didn't shake in his mouth. But when the yard emptied and the sound of boots stopped meaning loyalty, the silence said her name, and the man inside the armor listened. On the highest parapet, Ayla watched dawn erase the stars one by one. The veil lay folded on the balustrade. The wind combed her hair and brought back the sense of a life she had buried, stone warmed by wolf blood, pine smoke, the bittersweet tang of oiled steel. Below, banners with Ryland's crest spilled down the keep's face in measured symmetry. Peace wanted to live here. Peace did not know yet that it had moved into a house haunted by its former tenant. She had returned the way. Storms due without explanation with their own calendar. The first shock had passed. Now came the wait. In daylight, revenge was less like lightning and more like iron. Heavy, workable, needing hands that do not tremble. She studied hers on the cold stone and reminded her pulse it did not serve memory anymore. Bells summoned the council. She descended into the hall and took the chair given to foreign allies, not near the throne, not far enough to be insult. She felt every glance land and slide away. Curiosity was a soft knife. She had worn sharper. Ryland entered without velvet or horns, the way men enter rooms they trust. He took the dais and the keep exhaled. Some structures are built to be relieved by gentleness. He spoke of border raids, quick strikes in the north. Granaries fired under moonless sky, tracks that doubled back across their own prints. Not war, testing. A hunter tasting the fence. A map unrolled. Counselors argued about walls and watchtowers, the old preference for stone over sense. Ayla's gaze climbed the inked ridges, crossed the cut of river, found the pattern rattling its tin cup for attention. The marks were not random. They circled the keep like wolves circling a fire, each pass closer than the last. Ryland called for thoughts. Silence arranged itself into politeness. She stood. The hall's attention tightened, less hostile than careful. She named a pattern in the hand that draws it, not a rival pack, but a friend paid to misbehave. Inside work. Provisions burned where the loss would hurt a season later. Guards harried where night shift pride would take the blame. A patient appetite. Kale's head turned a fraction toward her voice. The space between his shoulders eased, and in that small unwinding the room saw a man remembering how to listen. Ryland asked questions that made sense. She answered without flourish, laying her reasons like stones. By the time she finished, the council had the dignity to look uneasy. Treason always sounds far-fetched until it reaches for your throat. The youngest counselor, hands ink-stained, eyes unpolitely honest, volunteered to audit supply routes with her. Ryland agreed. Kale said nothing. Silence can be sanction or permission. Hers did not ask which his was. She left the hall with the map under her arm and 3 guards, whose feet tried to be invisible. The day became corridors and ledgers, storerooms, and stamped wax. Names repeated too neatly. Crates miscounted with the consistency of intention. A signature that looked like a priest had learned to hold a knife. By dusk, a shape stood up inside the numbers. It had a shadow and a history and the smell of old incense. She did not say the name yet. Names, tilt rooms, dot snow began at evening, soft as lint from God's sleeve. The keep ate roast and told itself stories about order. In the outer courtyard, wolves danced the old pattern around the fire ring while drums kept modest time. Ayla walked the ring's edge and watched the light decide which faces to bless. Ryland found her there, the warmth of the fire making a domestic man out of him for 3 heartbeats. He asked if she had eaten. She glanced at his hands, scarless, steady, not bored by kindness. It is possible, she thought, to live a life that does not owe violence. She could not remember whether she ever wanted that dot they spoke in the way 2 strangers speak who do not intend to remain. So of roots and frost heave, of a granary whose stone would not hold another spring, of soldiers who train their bodies but not their nerves. His smile came easily and left when it should. Her answers gave nothing away and everything necessary. The silence between their sentences behaved itself. Some silences are safe to be near. Across the ring, Kale watched them, the fire putting forgiveness on everyone's face but his. Jealousy would have been simpler. What moved under his skin was narrower and deeper. The knowledge of a man who had taught himself how to live without breath and now heard someone offering air to the lungs he had. Caught her eyes shut. The arrow arrived like a decision, no wind warning. No stupid shout from the kind of assassin who wants credit. Just a slice of black through orange, angled for Ryland's throat. Ayla's body moved before memory had time to object. Veil up with one hand, she pivoted, caught the arrow's shaft in her palm, a finger from its iron head, and turned its hunger into the ground's problem. The thrower had already drawn a second. Her knife stitched across the firelight with the neatness of a signature. He felt behind the woodpile with the inconvenient honesty of a body. Time recovered itself in pieces. Guards flooded wrong doors. Wolves bristled. The crowd obeyed the old instinct and blamed itself. Ryland stood very still and looked at her hand, which had not shaken. He said nothing. He did not reach. His eyes said enough, and it was not dead. Cale was at the fallen man before rank remembered to suspect insult. He rolled the body and found a face he recognized without liking, a groom from the southern stables, whose father had never quite learned how to bow. In the dead man's collar, tucked where cloth meets habit, a strip of ribbon, white once, ash-ground now, stitched with a small crescent in thread the shade of old gold. Not a priest's only. A woman's hand had taught this seam discipline. Ayla saw the stitch from the edge of the ring. Her breath miscounted once. Lyra had hemmed her dresses with that small, perfect curve when they were girls. A habit becomes signature before it becomes confession. Ryland sent the courtyard to bed with a voice that convinced. Feared at other plans. He put the keep on quiet feet, no panic, twice the guards, no display. In the hush that followed, Cale found Ayla's eyes across the cooling fire. He did not move toward her. He bowed the smallest distance a man can bow without turning apology into demand, then left the ring not to his chambers, but to a place old grief keeps its tools. The library had been carved into the keep's shoulder when stone. Still remembered river. It smelled of oiled leather and rain that found ways in when wind begged. Cale lit no torches. He knew the shelves by touch. He had left pieces of himself here long before he broke anything breakable. Tonight he came not to read, but to return something he had kept too long because shame believes storage is penance. She arrived without sound. The door knew her way already. She did not ask how he knew she would come. Some rooms borrow the moon's honesty. He stood at the long table with a small bundle laid in its center, a pouch of dark silk, a pin of hammered silver in the shape of a crescent bitten through, and a vial stoppered in pewter. The pin had once held Luna's cloak where shoulder meets vow. The bite through it had not been art. He slid the bundle toward her with fingers that did not ask for redemption. Her breath stirred dust. The vial carried a residue of sweetness that was not innocent honey scorched at its edges. The pine bitter of ground needles, and underneath, the clean, medicinal rot of moonflower boiled awake. She had brewed this once under a foreign sky for a mercenary whose courage needed counterfeiting. Wolves called it by many names. In the old tongues it was silencer's kiss. It did not force. It confused heat where none belonged, consent tangled into ache, truth tugged out of its path into a ditch and made to drink. Her hand did not shake. Rage does not always want fire. Sometimes it wants a ledger. Cale's voice, when it came, carried no plea in its pockets. He spoke of a night 3 years gone as men speak of their own autopsies. He told it without its excuses, an empty ritual space. A cup in his hand, handed by a priest whose eyes had learned to kneel. A perfume he had smelled on 2 women his whole life, one he loved. One he trusted the way children trust furniture. The first sip had been celebration. The second heat. The third confusion, learning how to pretend to be choice. He remembered leaving the fire. He remembered forest. He remembered a mouth that tasted like home and not home both. He remembered waking into a silence that had no furniture. He did not say Lyra's name. He did not need to. The ribbon in the dead man's collar was saying it, for them in a voice that had always preferred whispering. Ayla listened without letting memory interrupt. When he stopped, she lifted the pin. Its break was not clean, as if teeth had met it once while laughter pretended to be permission. She set it down like evidence and did the thing she had not yet done since crossing the gates. She looked at him, as if the past were a fact and not a weapon. The room adjusted its weight to let the moment find its footing. It was not forgiveness. It was geometry, the new angle truth forced on the floor. She did not give him back anything else. She took the vial, the pin, the ribbon, and left him with the library's old task of holding men who do not deserve sleep. The keep had chosen its weather. By midnight, snow thickened, flattening noise. Patrol boots learned to whisper. In the northward storeroom, Sheen, the ink-stained counselor, pried up floorboards and found the need. Board secrets people keep when they are certain the world will always use the same. Accountant, a ledger where O's balanced receipts. Boxes with files nested like obedient sins, a coil of altar thread the color of gold, knowing it should have been humility. The ledger named nothing but left a space where a name had been. The way thieves leave drawers open to make honesty look like an accident. She sent the boy to Rylan. He ran like someone training to become a future. No one had assigned him. Alone again, she sat on the storeroom step in the company of crates and decided to bleed memory only as much as the job required. She unwound the ribbon one small loop at a time. Childhood is a room that smells like this linen, starch, the faint sweetness of a sister humming while a needle teaches cloth a better way to sit. Love and lies use the same spool. The sanctum waited where sanctums always wait behind doors that believe themselves unopenable. She went there because the ledger wanted her to and because the past had not finished its sentence. The corridor narrowed to persuade visitors to become pilgrims. Gold leaf pretended to be light. The altar welcomed the faithful with the soft arrogance of polished stone. No priest kept vigil. Cowards sleep when courage works. She walked the perimeter the way wolves mark. Her fingers found seams under paint where hands had changed their minds. A panel answered pressure with a tired sigh and became a door again. The closet within had never been a closet. It had been a careful crime. Shelves held stories reluctant to be told, amulets dipped in faith and fear both, bowls that had learned more about blood than rain, files sealed with the wax of men who believed God can be hired. The smell was the opposite of prayer. In the back, wrapped in cloth once white, lay a garment that had last held a woman up when language had failed her, a luna's cloak. The shoulder seam bore a scar in the shape of bite. The pin's break married it cleanly. She pressed silk to the bruise and the weave and closed her eyes once because bodies need a small mercy when history fits too well. A step in the outer hall. Not guard. Not Rylan. A weight she had carried her whole life, teaching bad habits to beautiful things. She turned before the sanctum door, learned to pretend again. The corridor's light thinned and a woman stood where shadow becomes memory. The face was her own, rewritten by entitlement. The mouth a scarless weapon. The eyes bright with the kind of joy only cruelty believes it deserves. Lyra smiled as if home were a performance and she remembered all her lines. Snow in her hair, gold at her throat, hands clean. She looked at the ribbon in Ayla's palm and the recognition did not blush. Sister, the moment said without needing a tongue. Shall we finish the night we started? The keep held its breath. Somewhere deep in the mountain, the old door that is not a door listened for the truth it had been promised and found itself. Interested again, Ayla did not reach for a blade. Some murders require both hands empty. She stepped from the closet into the sanctums. Dishonest glow and let the room see them side by side, the world's mistake and its correction. Lyra's smile widened just enough to suggest she'd already forgiven herself. Behind her, the corridor bent toward the council chamber where men were about to learn which of their prayers had been auditions. Somewhere outside, a wolf lifted its head and decided not to howl. The ribbon in Ayla's hand felt warmer. Memory sometimes does when it chooses to become evidence. She closed her fist around it and the cloth made a small, obedient sound. Night leaned in, curious. The moon did not look away this time. It wanted to watch. The night after the sanctum confrontation refused to end. Wind scraped at the shutters, testing for weakness, the way questions test for guilt. Inside the keep, torches burned low and nervous. Even fire wanted to eavesdrop. Ayla did not sleep. Sleep would have meant closing her eyes, and closing her eyes meant seeing Lyra smile. She sat at the edge of her bed, armor loosened but not removed. The ribbon clenched between her fingers until the cloth warmed with the pulse it borrowed. Betrayal had a body again. It looked like bloodkin. Outside, Kale walked the parapets. Snow gathered in his hair until he looked carved out of salt. The wolf inside him paced, restless, trying to fit regret into muscle memory. He had thought punishment ended when confession began. He had been wrong. Regret is a tide, it leaves, it returns, it leaves again. And each time it steals something you still needed. Down in the sanctum, Lyra prayed with her hands too clean for devotion. The goddess listened because gods are curious about liars who pray with talent. By morning the keep behaved as though daylight were an absolution. Rylan convened council before dawn. Grain, borders, bandits. The practical distractions of men who need to believe the world still follows arithmetic. Ayla stood beside him, veil gone, face plain and dangerous. The room obeyed her silence as if it were rank. Kale entered last, his eyes a warning that some histories have resumed breathing. The report she gave was simple. The assassin's era was not the first. 2 earlier attempts had been hidden behind accidents. The same gold thread had paid for all 3. When she placed the ribbon on the table, the council flinched, not at the evidence, but at the embroidery neat as prayer. Lyra's hand was in it. Ryland's expression changed slowly, like dawn through thick fog. Kale's breath shortened. The scar at his jaw whitened. The wolf inside him lifted its head. Ryland dismissed the room with a calm too heavy to be kindness. When they were alone, he said the thing no brother should have to, that loyalty has degrees. That blood cannot be trusted to know which way it flows. Kale listened, shoulders straight, as though posture could erase shame. He said only that he would find the rest of the traitors. It was not promise. It was prayer disguised as labor, met again. The moon waxed fat, curious. Ayla met Lyra in the garden where the statues had learned to keep secrets. Snow lay shallow on the hedges. Their footprints folded it into memory. Lyra's voice carried the lightness of rehearsed guilt. She spoke of misunderstanding, of the priest's potion, of curses misread. She said love like it was an alibi. Ayla let her speak until words began to circle themselves like flies. Then she stepped forward. The ribbon dangled between them, proof and accusation both. Her voice came low, even the tone of a storm choosing its first victim. She asked no questions. Questions would have given hope. She simply told her sister that the moon had watched that night, and that watching counts as witness. Lyra's mask cracked for the first time. Beneath it was something colder than fear, entitlement wounded. She said Ayla's name once, soft and venomous, and left before the snow learned to melt. Later, in the library's quiet, Kale waited. He had been waiting since guilt taught him patience. She entered without hesitation. The air between them already knew its lines. He said he would face Lyra himself. She said he would not. Revenge belonged to the injured, not the penitent. They stood so close that the silence between their breaths became language. He reached as though to touch the mark he never gave. She did not move away, but she did not move closer either. Mercy's a blade with etiquette. For a moment the world held its breath, and in that space the moon shifted behind a cloud, unwilling to judge. When light returned, they had already stepped apart. At dawn, horns sounded from the lower wall, 3 notes, the pattern for betrayal inside the gate. Guards running, shouts cutting through cold air. Ryland's banner torn down and replaced with none. A fire starting where the sanctum met the barracks. Lyra had not prayed for forgiveness. She prayed for cover. Ayla was in the courtyard before the alarm finished its 3rd breath. Smoke rolled above the chapel roof. She saw shapes in the haze robe, steel loyalty bought cheap. Kale dropped beside her from the parapet, landing like the end of his sentence. They did not speak. They moved. The sanctum door splintered. Inside, gold cloth burned beautifully. Lyra stood at the altar, a blade in one hand, faith in none. Around her, acolytes knelt with eyes already empty. She smiled at the siblings she had chosen to ruin. Ryland arrived behind them, sword bare, disbelief raw. The firelight turned his kindness into armor. For a moment, the 3 of them, brothers by blood and bond, sisters by betrayal and revenge, stood framed in a glow that could have been divine if divinity tolerated irony. Lyra spoke first. She called it justice, called it correction, called it destiny undone. Words dressed as reasons. Ryland stepped forward. Kale stopped him. Ayla walked through the smoke, each step burning a question she would never ask. The blade in Lyra's hand trembled once. More from vanity than fear. When steel met steel, the sound was memory returning to metal. Sparks drew constellations that had been erased. Kale caught the weapon before it reached Ayla's throat. Ryland disarmed the acolyte that lunged for his back. The fight was short, cruel, without ceremony. Betrayal rarely earns choreography. In the end, Lyra lay against the altar she had corrupted, eyes wide to the ceiling that would not save her. She laughed once, softly, the way a door laughs before closing. Ayla watched the light fade and felt nothing triumphant, only the relief of gravity remembering its job. She knelt, pressed the ribbon to her sister's hand, and whispered the words every hunter learns when mercy would be insult. Rest where you cannot follow me. When dawn finally lifted the smoke, Silver Ridge stood quiet. The fire had taken the sanctum, the priests, the old lies. It left the pack raw but breathing. Ryland tended to the wounded, giving orders that sounded like forgiveness. Cale disappeared into the mountains. Half exile, half penance, Ayla watched him go from the western wall. Snow swallowed his footprints faster than guilt could. The moon hung pale above them, both two halves of a story still arguing over its ending. She turned away at last, cloak whipping against the wind. The wolf inside her stretched, restless but free. For the first time since that long-ago night, the scent of pine did not hurt. The goddess kept her promise. The truth had been seen. What came next would no longer be revenge. It would be whatever life invents for those who survive their own ending. And somewhere in the high peaks, where storms sleep until summoned, a lone howl rose low, enduring. Neither grief nor joy, but the sound of a soul beginning again. The mountains slept beneath a sky of wounded silver. Wind cut between the peaks, carrying echoes of a war no one was left to fight. Cale had been walking for days, though the path had long stopped pretending to lead anywhere. His body obeyed movement because stillness invited thought, and thought was the only thing that could still kill him. Below, in the valley that used to be called home, smoke no longer rose from the sanctum. The pack rebuilt quietly, as creatures do when mercy forgets to supervise. Ryland rolled with the calm of a man who knew peace would never trust him fully but stayed anyway. Ayla remained at his side, not as consort, not as ghost, but as the kind of ally silence respects. The moon had moved on. Cale had not. He followed no trail but memory. Each night, the forest around him grew more honest. No drums, no vows, no voices. Just the earth keeping score. He hunted to eat, slept only when exhaustion tricked him. Sometimes he woke with the taste of ash in his mouth. Sometimes with her name in the darkest hour before dawn. He reached the cliff where he had once watched the pack's territory spread beneath him like proof that he existed. He stood there now, half man, half ghost, and whispered to the wind as if the world owed him an audience. The wind replied the way gods reply to confessions, by continuing to exist. Far below, Ayla woke from a dream that did not end when her eyes opened. The scent of pine clung to her skin, sharp and clean, as though memory had learned a new way to breathe. She dressed quietly, careful not to wake the keep. The corridors knew her footsteps now. They did not ask questions. When she stepped into the courtyard, the moon hung low and weary. The color of unspoken forgiveness. The wolf in her chest stirred, uneasy. Bonds do not break, they only sleep. She had thought his absence would feel like victory. It felt like an echo trying to find its source. She hated the sentiment but did not deny it. Truth rarely asks permission. By dawn, she was on horseback, climbing the ridge path that smelled of winter and regret. Ryland would understand. He always had. Some debts must be paid alone. Cale heard the hooves before he saw her. Wolves hear differently when the sound belongs to the person they ruined. He didn't turn. The cliff's edge was narrow, and he had not yet decided whether forgiveness required altitude. When her horse stopped behind him, the silence that followed felt like punctuation, an end or a beginning, undecided. She dismounted without a word. Snow whispered under her boots. Between them stretched the distance carved by everything unsaid. The wind rose, smelling of pine and ghosts. Cale spoke first, the words rough from disuse. He said that he had come here to end what should have ended long ago. She told him that endings do not ask for volunteers. Her voice was steady, and that steadiness broke him more than her anger ever could. He turned finally. The years had carved sorrow into his face with the precision of a craftsman who loved his work too much. He looked older, smaller, truer. The wolf behind his eyes was tired, but not dead. It looked at her and remembered hunger, loyalty, and the single mistake that had rewritten both. He said her name. The sound was not a plea. It was acknowledgement. She stood close enough to see the tremor in his hands. He told her what she already knew, that the priest had belonged to Lyra's web, that the potion had stolen his will for 1 hour and his soul for all the years after, that he had searched for her until the border wolves turned on him, until Rylan declared him lost, that he had carried the mark she refused to take like a brand native memory. She listened because truth deserved that much. But when he said forgiveness, she shook her head. Forgiveness was a word for gods and children. What she had instead was understanding, and it was heavier. Snow thickened. The wind began to chant. She told him about Lyra's last breath, about the ribbon, about the way their sister had smiled while dying as if death were just another stage she owned. He closed his eyes. The sound that left him wasn't grief, it was relief, sharp enough to cut. A wolf's howl rose from far below, lonely and clean. It broke something open inside them both. Cale looked at her once more and saw not the girl he had marked in his dreams, but the woman who had marked herself in the world's scars. He said she was free. She answered that freedom is just another word for surviving what kills everyone else. They stood like that for a long time, two survivors of the same myth, breathing each other's cold. The cliff was wide enough for both, but barely. When he finally stepped back toward the edge, she didn't stop him. The wolf inside her tensed but obeyed. He looked at the horizon, at the line where sky kissed mountain, and smiled, a small tired curve that looked like peace. Then he let go. The fall was silent. The snow swallowed him without ceremony. Ayla did not cry. The wind did that for her, carrying the sound away before it could become weakness. She stayed until dawn melted the frost from the rocks. When the first light touched the valley, she whispered the words only wolves and widows understand. Run if you must. Rest if you can. By the time she returned to the keep, the world had already rewritten its story. Rylan met her at the gate, said nothing, simply looked at her eyes and knew. He did not ask where Cale had gone. Some disappearances require faith, not explanation. Days turned into weeks. The pack healed in the way packs do by pretending pain is tradition. The sanctum was rebuilt, stripped of gold, left bare stone. Ayla refused the title of Luna again. The moon had already claimed too much of her life. Instead, she taught. She trained wolves to fight cleanly, to trust silence, to listen when their hearts lied. Her name became legend, the kind that mothers whisper to daughters who think love is safe. Sometimes, when the wind turned north, she would stand on the balcony and feel the cold bite her cheeks. In that bite, she swore she could still smell pine. In that scent, she could still hear the faintest echo of a voice saying her name the way forgiveness might if it ever learned to live in the mouth of a sinner. Winter ended reluctantly that year. Snow withdrew like a guest overstaying its welcome. The river thawed. The forest grew new leaves on old wounds. One evening, as the sun fell behind the ridge, Ayla saw movement at the tree line, a dark shape against the gold light, large, limping slightly, eyes bright as memory. A wolf, black as midnight, watching her from a distance. Her heart stopped, then learned again. The wolf did not move closer. It simply stood as if to prove that ghosts do not always stay dead. Then it turned and vanished into the forest, leaving behind tracks that melted before reaching the gate. She smiled, not sadly this time. The wind carried pine. The moon rose slow and approving. The alpha was gone. The story remained, and somewhere in the wild, a wolf that had forgotten how to die learned finally how to live again. Spring came to Silver Ridge with the unease of a stranger at an old table. The snow retreated in slow apologies, leaving rivers swollen with secrets. Grass fought its way through frost. The pack moved lighter, laughed sooner. To those who did not know the history, it might have looked like peace. But peace is never silence, it's the sound of wounds. Learning to breathe, Ayla stood on the eastern wall as dawn spilled over the valley. Her cloak moved in the wind, brushing against the scars on her wrists that time still refused to smooth. Below, young wolves sparred in the yard, their laughter clean, untainted. She should have felt pride. Instead, she felt the strange hollowness that visits those who survive everything they swore they wouldn't. The moon still watched her, pale and tireless, even in daylight. Sometimes she wondered if it remembered the night it turned away, the night she was meant to be marked and became marked by betrayal instead. It must remember. The moon remembers everything. In the keep's quiet corridors, Rylan's footsteps echoed like a promise that refused to fade. He ruled differently, less command, more care. He listened even when listening hurt. The wolves loved him for it. The elders feared him for the same reason. Mercy unsettles those who rely on guilt for order. That morning he found Ayla still on the wall. Her hair tangled by wind, her eyes lost somewhere far beyond the horizon. He didn't speak right away. Some griefs have learned to startle at kindness. When he did, his voice was steady, the tone of a man who has already made his peace with her ghosts. He told her the scouts had found something beyond the river, a cave near the mountain's root, filled with symbols none of them could read. But the air inside had smelled of wolf and ash. He said her name softly then, not as Alpha, not as command, but as man calling to woman who once belonged to moonlight. Ayla turned. The sound of her name felt different now, less like an echo, more like possibility. She asked if the scent had been pine. He nodded. For a long time neither spoke. Then she said she would go. By nightfall she was already deep in the forest. The trees there were older than kings, their trunks blackened by forgotten fires. The air shimmered faintly with the kind of power that doesn't belong to prayer. Wolves watched her from the shadows but did not follow. They knew whose story this was. The cave waited where the river bent like a wound refusing to heal. Its entrance yawned wide, carved by hands too old for memory. She dismounted, her boots sinking into the damp earth. The scent hit her at once, pine, cold rain, and something faintly metallic beneath it. Blood, familiar, the kind the heart remembers even after it decides to forget. She lit a torch and stepped inside. The flame trembled, painting ghosts on the walls. Symbols curved across the stone moons, wolves' chains. And there, at the center of the cave, half covered by a pelt and time itself, lay a body, not decayed, not alive, preserved by something stronger than death. Kale. The sight didn't steal her breath. It returned it. He looked exactly as he had on that cliff, the same stillness, the same quiet apology in his face. The wolf mark on his shoulder glowed faintly, pulsing with each flicker of her torch. Her hands shook, but not from fear. From recognition. The bond she had buried came awake like an old wound, remembering why it hurts. She knelt beside him. His skin was cold, but not gone. The moon had taken him, yes, but not fully. The old stories had warned of this. The alpha who falls by love's hand is never claimed by soil. He becomes part of the threshold between world's guardian, penance, warning. Her eyes filled, not with tears, but with light. The torch sputtered once and steadied. She whispered to him, not his name, but his truth. That she had forgiven the man, but not the memory. That she had found her place among the living, not the haunted. That she no longer carried his sin, only the lesson it left behind. The cave listened. The mark on his shoulder dimmed, as if her words were the final ritual it had been waiting for. The air grew warmer. For a moment, she swore she saw his chest rise. Just once. Enough for her to know he had heard. Then the light died. When she stepped out of the cave, dawn was breaking again. The first sunbeam caught her hair, turning it to fire. The forest was quiet, but not heavy. Something in it had been released. She mounted her horse and looked back only once. The mountain stood still, but its silence was different now, softer. Almost grateful. As she rode back towards Silver Ridge, the wind shifted. It carried a howl from somewhere deep in the pines, not mourning, not rage. A promise. The sound brushed against her like a farewell. She smiled, small and tired and whole. For the first time, the smile did not hurt. Years later, stories of the two wolves of Silver Ridge traveled beyond the mountains. One betrayed and was forgiven. One avenged and was reborn. Together they taught that love is not a bond, it's a trial. One even the moon must answer for. Children asked where the alpha went. Elders pointed to the mountains and said, "There, guarding the place where endings rest." And when the moon rose full and bright, lighting the ridge like a crown, the pack swore they could see two shadows walking side by side, one human, one wolf, both free. Ayla never sought the mark again. She wore her scars as vows instead. Rylan stood beside her in counsel, in peace, in quiet. Together they built something stronger than power, stability. The kind of legacy that didn't need blood to remember, but every full moon. When the wind came down from the mountains, smelling faintly of pine and regret, she would look up and whisper to the sky, "Greater than you were forgiven." "Kale, but I was never yours to save." And the wind would answer with that same low howl. circling the keep like a benediction, fading into the distance until even grief sounded like grace.